What's up, Tribe? As I promised, I have here Austin Bridges and Gary Bean from L&L Research. Most of you should know who they are, but I want to give you guys a little time for introducing yourself. Just say who you are. I want to know like how you got into L&L Research and what are you guys doing right now currently. So I'm going to start with you, Austin.
Yeah, my name is Austin Bridges, along with Gary. I'm co-director of LL Research. And how I got involved with LL Research, obviously it involved my spiritual awakening back around 2009, 2010. I don't know the exact date because it's kind of a blur, but it was around then that I found the Law of One after some initial spiritual seeking, a long stint as sort of a militant atheist. Some of my walls were broken down and I discovered the Law of One, and it immediately became my spiritual backbone. And so from that point, I sought out LL Research online. I joined the online forums at bringforth.org, started engaging with the community, and eventually Gary invited me to volunteer as a moderator on the forums. And that was the beginning of our working relationship. At that point, he was the administrator working with Carla and Jim in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we had a good working relationship. As I was volunteering as moderator, I came up to Louisville to meet them in 2012 for our homecoming event. And again, just really easy working relationship. We hit it off really well. And in 2013, they invited me to come join Gary in the office. So I moved up to Louisville in 2013 and been here ever since. And we are now co-directors of LR Research.
Beautiful. Thank you, Austin. Senor Gary.
Gabriel, sorry, I didn't say this earlier. It is great to finally see you in person. We've been corresponding over email, and LL Research and the readership are grateful for your and your team's work on the Spanish translation of the Raw Contact. So very diligent and fastidious in your desire for precision, which is common with most who fall in love with the Law of One. Me, 1998 was when my own awakening began. Prior to that point, I was just kind of asleep at the wheel, just living in a world that had been inherited from society, culture, parents, friends, school, so forth. And within a couple of years of my own awakening, which began with questions really, and an awareness that there was much more to the world, spiritually, historically, so forth, pursuing my own questions. And probably about a year and a half later, I stumbled on the Law of One, Book One, online in January 2000. And I haven't been the same since. I could really divide my life up into before the Law of One and after the Law of One. I was crying when I read it online for the first time. I had come home and found my philosophical home. So it's been part of my identity and framework for understanding ever since. Met Carla and Jim a couple of years later, April 2002, almost 20 years ago now. And several months later, February 2003, they invited me to move in with them as to join their experiment in spiritual community in their own home. So myself and a few others relocated to Louisville, Kentucky. I was elated with the opportunity, and I got to live with Carla and Jim for several years, and I've obviously worked with them ever since. A couple of years after that, 2006, Carla created the first formal paid position in LL Research. She wanted to be freed up to work on creative work, like Living the Law of One 101. So she created this administrative assistant position and told me I needed to fill it. She invited me and was insistent. And from there, I've been with LL in a formal capacity ever since. Austin described how he and I met, and presently we are partners in co-directorship of running the organization and working with a wide variety of people to serve the readership and to fulfill the mission of LL Research.
So I'm going to ask you more about that at the end, especially what you guys are up to. So, because I know there's been a lot of changes and I'm fascinated with the new website. So I want to know a little bit more. Before we start with the questions, and Gary, you just mentioned that the law of one became the framework, sort of like the structure for your philosophical views or understanding of the world. I want to ask you guys what the law of one actually has become for you. And you don't have to go into the detail that what the law of one is in terms of the material, or if it's a philosophical, spiritual approach, but rather what it has become to you, because it seems like most of us who find the law of one, like you said, Gary, it just becomes something so deeply emotional for us that it kind of elicits this, you just said it perfectly. You just go back home. You feel like, you have found something that was always within you, but you just hadn't seen it externally. And that's how you kind of see it, right? So how does this, I guess what I'm trying to say, what does this represent right now? And I'll go with you, Austin, with, what this whole body of the law of one that you live, actually, speaking of Carla's book, Living the Law of One, what does this mean to you, Austin?
It's a very good question. Thank you. Similarly to you and Gary, when I first read The Law of One, it's a very common way for certain people to describe it. It felt like finding home, like homecoming. Another way that people commonly describe it is it felt like remembering something that you had forgotten. And that's, very much my experience when I first discovered it. The, inner resonance that I felt when I discovered the Law of One is the most powerful thing I've ever felt in my life, I think. And it's so undeniable. And that honestly hasn't really changed much. It's been over a decade that I've been studying the material, very constantly. And I still will sometimes read a passage and it just strikes me to my core, feeling like this is something that is sings to my heart so powerfully that, whatever truth is contained, it's undeniable to me and myself subjectively. So that's how powerful it is for me. As for what it's become for me, it precipitated a massive transformation in my life on all levels and became sort of the framework for me to understand my experience in this world. Before the Law of One, I had a very bleak view of existence and felt like I was a victim of life, essentially. And the Law of One, one of the most powerful things it does is it empowers people to, make context of their life and actually own it and find a way to use their life to, engage in spiritual transformation. So that is the most profound teaching for me that I still benefit from on a constant basis. And the other thing I would say is that I view the Law of One as sort of my lens when I'm reading anything else in regards to spiritual seeking. So it became like my spiritual backbone. It's my spiritual platform, but my spiritual seeking wasn't limited just to the Law of One. It opens the doorway to a lot of other things. And having the context of the Law of One helped me to then be able to see the value of other types of spiritual teachings, which I never saw before. So it became a lens for me to then look at certain other types of teachings. Like I got into the teachings of Carl Jung very heavily. And, that made a lot more sense to me, having the Law of One as this lens that I could view it through. I can relate things back. And still to this day, any new sort of profound, insightful information that I find, it's always sort of through that lens of the Law of One, where I relate things to the Law of One. And thanks to the idea that, it's not a unique truth, like Ross says in the very first session, they're here to offer a different slant on information that is always and ever the same. And that's essentially what is called the perennial philosophy. It's this essential spiritual truth that's contained in a lot of different spiritual frameworks and spiritual philosophies. And thanks to the fact that it's so consistent, there are consistent points in all these philosophies, the law of one became my lens for seeing that, and not just spiritual works, but a lot of things in our society and in our culture.
Beautifully said. I have comments, but I want to hear Gary first.
Comment away. Yeah, so likewise, I resonate with so much of what Austin just said and feel very similarly. It is very sunny outside right now in Louisville, and it makes me think that as the sun is to the earth, the law of one is to me philosophically. It is my philosophical sun. And really, I cannot overestimate its impact on my own journey. I can't really picture who I would be, where I would be, what I would be doing without it. I've said before that I would be scraping my knuckles somewhere were it not for the law of one, which is a figure of speech, connoting what a primate I would be without the illumination of the law of one. So it has become so integrated into my identity and my framework that I see the world through that lens, through the picture that the law of one paints. And fortunately, I feel really blessed, absolutely blessed to be working with this philosophy. Like Austin said, not to make it a sacred cow per se. He said, it's not a unique truth. We're not fundamentalists about it. There are so many gems of spiritual insight available in the world, including from other people, not just written text, but each person is a living representation of the law of one in their own way. And the law of one is all around us. So we're not dogmatic or fundamentalist about it. However, I do love it, and I do want to express my passion for it. And I think, to me, it's the most elegant and sophisticated philosophy available on this planet. Keep my eyes open for something greater. And there are deeper, more focused sources of insight into non-duality. For instance, Ramana Maharshi is a favorite of mine. And his method of self-inquiry is much more laser focused than the law of one on the dissolution of the individual self. Nonetheless, I think it's the best. and I'm trying to clarify why I feel blessed by it, because it's such a universal and inclusive philosophy that nearly any aspect of one's experience of reality, of thought, can be situated and integrated into its container. Everything can fit. There's nothing that is so fundamentally incongruent that you can't find a way to integrate it into the law of one. Therefore, like Austin was indicating, it becomes a yardstick by which I can filter and understand anything else I may encounter. And I'll stop this rambling by indicating its personal impact in terms of showing me what is possible. The doors that it opens to the universe for transformation and healing are very real and very profound. It is a very empowering philosophy in revealing to me that by working on myself, by working with my catalysts, by learning to open the heart and express forgiveness and so forth, I will be, so to speak, moving toward the creator. And in so doing, I can discover myself and all things as the creator. I can heal, and I can, instead of playing by the rules of the illusion per se, I mean, we still have to live within this illusion and play the rules to a degree. I can, however, transcend those limitations and seek love and pursue my spiritual evolution. Anyway, you're going to have a hard time getting short answers from us. So
good. Oh man, yeah, the three of us together, we can probably extend for hours, I'm sure.
yeah.
I just want to comment, Austin, I feel so identified with or related with the atheist part, which I think is a really important aspect of the law of one, which, for those who have the curiosity to open up and just accept a little bit of, not knowing and reading the law of one, it seems like it helps out a lot of that skepticism. I would call it skepticism is what's dominated in me. It was before my spiritual awakening and after is this skepticism. And the law of one just seems to cater, perfectly to skepticism, because one of the things that I love is that even, the raw material can be fully questioned, and we can we can get text that we can say, well, this was written by a human. So we know it exists and we praise this human. But the law of one, even that, it lives in its own mystery, that you have to have the faith to, get into it. And with that faith, then you create your own truth and say, okay, just this simply resonates too much for me I cannot ever validate it, but it's just validated inside me. So I think that's at least how my mind works in terms of the skepticism and the way the law of one just describes things for me. And the other thing, Gary, that you said that I think is the dilemma that we all get into, because we're so passionate about this that we're kind of cautious, to not sound, dogmatic, or that we're, just praising this as the one truth. But rather, I think, and I was reflecting on it this morning, that there is actually nothing spiritual, in the same way that we can say that everything's spiritual. So to point out at something and say, that this is the truth, it's only saying, this is my truth. And the beauty of the law of one is just that it enhances that truth that we kind of know. And, it just validates it for us, that it's so intense that we just become passionate about it. But anyhow, we got to get into questions. So thank you guys for sharing that. It means a lot. So, all right, we're about 20 minutes in, and here's the first question. We're going to start a little bit light with harvest, which is a topic that I know is all the rage now. It's the first question that everybody has, when they get into the law of one. It's like, what is this harvest? And we're going to start with Austin, and then we're going to go, if you have anything to add, Gary, you can go into, but then we're just going to go, next one with you. But the thing that I have is that I might have a little remark or question for you on top of that, depending, on how much you elaborate. And I'm going to switch to the other person, so it'll make sense. So Austin, Semillas de Luz asks, what is harvest, and does it happen in all planets?
What is harvest, and does it happen on all planets? That's a long, it could be a very long answer, so I'll do my best to summarize. Harvest is an aspect of our evolution of the soul, in which, as Ra describes, we as mind, body, spirit complexes move through what Ra calls densities, 7 densities within what we're experiencing in our octave of creation. And a harvest is essentially a part of the mechanism that moves us from one density to the other. So the meaningful part for us is that Earth, as it is right now, is a third density planet going through harvest and transitioning to a fourth density planet. So what harvest essentially is the process where we as spiritual seekers, or as any beings really, as our planet goes through this process, the planet will become a fourth density planet, and we will essentially go through a sort of test where we will figure out whether or not we're ready for fourth density experience. And if we are harvested to the next density, and then we continue fourth density here on planet Earth. If we're not, then it's not like a big deal. There's, infinite time in the universe. You simply repeat third density on another planet. So harvest is among many ways to describe it, just simply the process of us graduating to the next density from our current density. And does it happen on all planets? Insofar as I'm aware, as Ra talks about and as Kuo talks about, any planet that kind of starts the process of going from first density to second to third and has mind, body, spirit complexes on it will engage in that process unless something happens to prevent that. Ra talks about, for instance, planets destroying themselves, as supposedly happened in our solar system with the planet Maldek, which is supposedly the origins of the asteroid belt. That planet supposedly completely disintegrated. Mars supposedly had entities on that planet that weren't able to finish their harvest because they destroyed their biosphere. And then Ra also talks about some third density planets that didn't get to finish their harvest because I believe I'm right about this, because their suns were dying and their planets were becoming unviable for life. So it's not necessarily the case that every planet will for sure go through harvest, but it is part of the process that's innate in the universe, that every planet that has beings on it will be part of this process. And they might not finish it specifically, but if they don't, those entities will just continue on with their spiritual evolution on another planet and undergo harvest on that planet.
Awesome. Thank you, Austin. I just thought about a question that, I'm going to increase the difficulty for Gary now. You mentioned something, Austin, that when it happens, and if it happens in all planets, there's one section where Ra talks about the planets that I believe, you already talked about, Venus. I don't know if you touch on that, but Venus, was obviously a planet that went through most densities. I think it's in fifth density right now, or hard. It's welcome in fifth density entities, planet Earth, Mars, Maldek. But Gary, Ra at some point says that the certain planets will not undergo the process of all densities. Does that mean that there will be no entities, like say Jupiter? I know, I think it was Uranus or Neptune that was in first density, something like, I don't know, if refresh me there, and what happens with those planets? What's your idea with that?
Yeah, it wasn't deeply explored in the material, but my sense of it is that simply some planets don't evolve life that will move through the curriculum of first, second, third, fourth density. So what exactly that means for the planet, I'm not sure. They are maybe it's a rocky planet, maybe it's a gas giant like Jupiter is. They just simply don't support the evolution of consciousness through the curriculum. And regarding Uranus, Rod did indicate that, Austin, did they say that Uranus is in first density? They indicated that it's possible, it's showing a potential for life to evolve, but I don't remember if they said that Uranus is in first density right now. I can't recall.
Yeah, that's my memory, that they talked about the possibility of it advancing through the densities, but it's in first density right now.
Yeah, what makes, thank you. What makes a planet eligible or capable of hosting life? That was not explored, so I can only guess, why Earth and Venus might, and not say Jupiter.
One of the speculations that I had just in my head was that they seem to be extensions of the logos for some reason to just create a sort of balance in the celestial bodies, because I know that they have some sort of influence, obviously, on everything in the solar system. So to me, when I was reading that session, I said, well, the only thing that makes sense to me is that. But thank you. Let's continue with harvest. And Gary, this will go for you. Tomas Iñiguez asks, what can I do to be harvested? What can I do to help according to the law of one?
Good question, Tomas. Big questions too. So regarding being harvested, obviously the third density entity is on a soul level desirous of successfully learning the lessons of this particular level and graduating and moving forward. However, it can also be a bit of a pitfall, I think, for we in the incarnate state to concern ourselves overly much with this notion that we have to pass a grade, so to speak. But let's dig into the metaphysics of what constitutes a successful completion of third density, allowing the soul to be harvested. Ra gives some numbers. They describe a vibratory rate of the entity. And they say if that vibratory rate is at least 51% service to others, then the soul at the time of harvest, let me clarify, then the mind, body, spirit complex will be ready to graduate and withstand the increased and denser light of fourth density, and they can move on. How does one make their vibratory rate 51%? I think the simple answer is basic compassion, kindness, the seeing of the creator in others and the self, the desire to honor and support the free will of others, the love of other people and the self, the free sharing of one's gifts, of one's light, of one's love with others. These processes polarize us. They, in Ra's terms, increase our vibratory rate, so that instead of seeking to manipulate others for self-gain or exploit others, we are moving closer to recognizing the sacredness in all of life and in others. And there was a second half of this question. Tomas said, how to help.
What can I do to help according to the law of one?
So Don actually asked pretty much that question a couple of times in the law of one. What is the best way to be of service to others? And Ra indicates in different variations that the best way to service to others is through the radiation of realization of oneness with the creator. So one way to interpret that is to say, by being yourself, by being your most authentic, true self, you are being of service to others. But what is it to be your true self? The true self ultimately is the creator. The true self ultimately is not the outer costume of personality and biography per se. Those are important parts of our identity, of course. But the true self is coming into an awareness of the love within us. So the more that we work to open our hearts, to release fear, to exercise faith, to deepen our awareness of who and what we really are, which is to say, to deepen our awareness of and contact with the one creator, the more that our light shines, the brighter we become. And that necessarily shines outward and affects others. There are infinite number of things we can do on the surface. We can listen to a friend in need. We can be there for a loved one who is ill. We can donate to a charity. We can share our gifts, whatever they may be. We may be a singer, we may be a writer, we may be just good with jokes. And that's our particular gift. But first and foremost, our service is one of being, just being who and what we really are. So even if we're not, doing anything in the outward world, insofar as we're just opening our heart, we are energetically radiating the love of the creator. And that is our first and most powerful service.
Love it. I just thought about something that Kuo said about some, like the importance of service can be, somebody who is just simply going back to their kids at home and, just having a 8 to 5 job, or, it could be anything. As long as, that person is simply being, like, there is, I love when they said that there is, all services are, are equal in the eyes of the creator. So, it's, we get caught into that, that we have to do something, that it has to be a great service. We kind of get into this polarized view that, there's something greater, than what I do. And Austin, I want to flip it back to you with a little bit more difficulty, but not so much. You brought a good point, Gary, and I want to get your take, Austin, because you see, we get into this idea that we have to do, and it seems like to be is non-doing. To be is simply being. And, as the seeker, and I think this is, what I want to get to, this, when the seeker gets overwhelmed with what should I do? What should I do? I need to do something to be harvested or to help. How do you see, Austin, this, flowing in people and kind of easing down this necessity?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I think also relies more on an interpretation of the material. And we should say, I guess, at this point that, everything that Gary and I talk about, that we're talking about here, it's our interpretation of the material. And we don't necessarily want to present ourselves as authorities in interpretation. So, take everything we say as just our own opinions. And we encourage everybody to have their own relationship with the material. And it's important here because, that's a very personal question about how one engages in that process of going from doing to being. And I think that it is a process. I think it's very natural for especially spiritual seekers who awaken to engage with this mentality, this urgency of feeling they need to do and they need to do. And I think that is just something that everybody will go through. Maybe not everybody, but something that is natural to go through. And it's part of the lessons that we learn as we engage with the spiritual process, where we engage with that attitude. But as we're going through that, we're also evolving and realizing that there is enough, or there is as much going on inside as there is outside. And so you see all this service, all this need on the outside of you that you feel you need to address. There is an equal amount of, inner beingness that needs to be addressed, that as well. And so that is an important aspect of the spiritual journey, for me anyways, is this realization of the work to do inside. And another iteration of what Gary was saying that Ross said was the process of service, or the best way to be of service. One of Ra's quotes, one of my favorites, is the best way to be of service to others is the constant radiation of the love of the creator as it is known to the inner self. And it's a very rich quote. One of the important aspects to me is as it is known to the inner self, which means that it requires self-knowledge, and it requires you to have an inward perspective of who you are, what you have to offer. And I think that as we engage with the process of spiritual evolution and we are engaging with this urgency to do, we are learning more and more about who we are, and it becomes more of a process of accepting who we are, and the process of service becomes a lot more natural to our own natural selves, our own inner true self that we discover through the process of engaging with that. And so we end up at a place where I think, in my view, the beingness that you're talking about, it might look different from the doing that we were doing, or it might look the same, but it's just coming from a different place. It's not coming from a place of seeing something outside of yourself that has to be addressed through action. It comes from a place of a natural radiation of the creator's love that is more of a just natural flow of, you might see a service to be performed, and that is automatically performed based on your trust in yourself and your faith in yourself and your ability to tap into that love that you've realized in yourself that comes from the creator.
Love it. It's almost like we have to go through that process of, finding out what I need to do to explore the possibilities and kind of see what's shining from you. And you sort of pick, what is it? At least that was, it has been my experience and how I got into doing what I do now, which was just exploring, finding out what really was that I wanted to do. And I at the beginning, it was just like this need to serve other people, and this was prior to the law of one. The law of one actually, settled me down and said, okay, this is how you do it, or this is how you don't do it. All right. So thank you guys. Let's give it a little spin to the harvest. And actually, this is a good question. Annabella Zuccarelli says, if we understand that planet Earth is already in fourth density in this space-time, and we are in harvest time, can we say that most of the mind-body-spirit complexes incarnated at this time are harvestable? Or is there a high percentage that will have to repeat the learning teachings of third density on another third density planet? So I'll go, I think it was you, Austin, so you go again.
That's a really difficult question. It's not one that we have necessarily a clear answer for. I would make one observation of my own interpretation, and that is that Earth is in fourth density in time-space. Space-time, it's a little more of a complicated situation where we're sort of holding on to the vestiges of third density. And so while Ra does say that, Earth is clearly in fourth density time-space, which is, that's a very complicated system to talk about it through, but we still have a third density environment here on Earth. And I think that's really apparent. Third density is the density of the veil of forgetting, where our awareness of self as creator is not innate. We have to, seek to discover it, and we have to make the choice to serve others. And to me, that environment being so present on Earth indicates that this planet is still, available for third density experience. And so if third density entities can get something out of this environment at this time, then I personally don't see why they wouldn't continue to incarnate here until the planet itself becomes unviable for third density experience. So I would say that the fact that we're in harvest right now, as Ra indicates, and that, this is a planet on the verge of fourth density, we're like right on the cusp of fourth density, there's definitely going to be a higher percentage of harvestable individuals. And even, as Ra indicated, some individuals who have already been harvested and are incarnating in a special type of what Ra calls a dual activated body. But I also think that there are plenty of individuals here on Earth who are third density innate and working towards making that choice. Maybe they haven't quite met it yet. And many who are trapped in what Ra calls the sinkhole of indifference, where they haven't made the choice between service to others and service to self. So I think that answers the question that you asked.
Yeah, beautifully, actually. I have a follow-up for you, Gary, because like you said, Austin, the planet is already going through harvest, and there's one of the things that I think is that if the harvest is going, and it seems like since about 2012, this is, and correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's a sort of vague date that we get in the raw material, and also by Kuo in one of the channelings, that 2012 was when the harvest sort of started. So it seemed like it was a threshold for the incarnated entities here in third density to graduate or simply await or incarnate in another planet for the third density. So it reminds me also of the parable that Jesus said about, and I'm terrible with quotes, so I don't remember, the quotes, but he meant about like plucking the weeds. Like this would be the plucking of the weeds, and it sounds a little harsh language, especially for people that are sensitive, but it seems to fit into the harvest that let's say entities who haven't graduated to fourth density are now being taken into maybe another planet, or does it have to go through the whole process of harvest before they can go into another planet to repeat their density? And likewise, does this also mean that all the entities that are being born after 2012 are graduates either from another planet or from here that are coming, like Austin said, in dual activated bodies? I know it's a very complicated, topic to get into, but I don't know if you want to give your insights, Gary.
Hey, shh, Sorry, my dogs want to contribute.
That's fine. Second density entities are allowed to.
Yeah, they're wondering why this program is so biased towards third density entities only. Yeah, so let me add a quick little bit about service to others. Gabriel, you raised some good points, and I want to clarify that one of the key characteristics of service to others is the desire to serve only insofar as it is requested or needed. So empathy plays a big part in service to others, in that one who is positively polarizing seeks to help others only where there is a need or request, however that may be perceived. So, there's a necessity to listen and understand the universe that others live in and find out what it is that they may need, and then serve accordingly. Maybe they don't have a need, maybe they do. So, okay, sorry about that. Back to the harvest question. Yeah, there is a lot of room for interpretation, discussion, and debate on these topics. There's very few hard and clear answers. Regarding the 2012 date, like you said, Gabriel, there's Ra does give a vague indication connected to their mention of things happening in 30 years from now. I forget what exactly they said, but it more or less coincided with the 2012 date. So as indicated from Confederation sources, and as was very prevalent in the New Age community generally, there does seem to be a sense that around the 2012 date, there was some threshold that was crossed. And what I believe was crossed was what Austin was describing about the planet now being in a fourth density time space environment. But our space-time environment, that is the physical world into which we incarnate, in which we operate on a daily basis, is not cooperating, let's say, with the fourth density energy. It's not integrating and welcoming the new environment. It's slowing down the process. Rod described that it is the third density consciousness on this planet is retarding the process. So in other words, we are still clinging on to our third density consciousness and values and worldview and so forth. my read of the situation is that were our planet unified into one basic orientation, if we had greater harmony and cooperation and communication, less division, less war, less anger, and so forth, then fourth density would begin to manifest in a much more accelerated way in our space-time, in our physical world. The fourth density isn't, I don't see it as sort of this reality that is suddenly imposed on us, imposed on the third density population, and we cross that boundary and suddenly everything's fourth density. Instead, I see a situation whereby fourth density is born through us, which again loops back to why self-work is so important. The more that we clear out our own energy centers, balance and activate them, the more light we allow through, the more we are supporting the birth of a new world, the emergence of the fourth density grid into space-time. And in terms of the population on the planet now, also no clear answers there. Confederation sources did seem to indicate that the harvest would, relatively speaking, be small. They have never been able to predict final numbers because the process is not yet complete. So who knows how many will successfully learn the lessons of third density, whether on the service to self path or service to others. But the situation has typically indicated that only a small percentage of people on the planet are learning, guys, come on, are learning the lessons, are achieving a harvestable rate, as Ra would describe it. But that's also highlights the reason why wanderers are here at this time, and other beings like you indicated, Gabriel, who have harvested, who are fourth density eligible from other experiences. They're all here to support that harvest, to help increase the numbers insofar as it's possible. And that's not by getting on a soapbox or going on a campaign, though if one has teaching to share, of course that could be helpful and of inspiration. But just by existing here and opening our hearts and breathing this air, we help to, as Ra calls it, lighten the planetary vibration. The planetary vibration is heavy with anger and war and division and misunderstanding. And the more hearts that open, the lighter the environment itself becomes. The lighter the environment becomes, the more that those third density natives wanting to learn, wanting to graduate, have an increased opportunity to come to love, essentially, to see themselves in the world more clearly. And did I speak to your question at all?
Absolutely, yeah. No, and actually, I want to piggyback on, I think the most brilliant part of the answer that you just gave is that, how is an inner work that we're lightening the planet's vibration by simply becoming who we are. And, by just focusing on clearing out, it seems like we were just talking about before, like we think that the doing, like the actual action of what we do is what changes things. But once you start working on yourself and you see how you work out your own confusion, you seem to see reality somehow change. It's like a magic that happens, and there is much less confusion around you. And you see how it's just to put it, where the aura around you just changes. And I mean, other people and the people you attract to yourself, not, from a selfish reason that you're going to do this to attract quote unquote better people, but it's just you being this genuine person just seem to alleviate all the confusion and anger that you're mentioning. So thank you for sharing that. Good answer. Right. This is a good question here from Daniel Garcia, who says, what is the destiny of negatively polarized entities? And I would just add that this is through the densities. Like, what is how can a negative entity say graduate and continue through the densities? And that would be for you, Gary.
The destiny of the negative entity is the same as all entities in the universe, and the destiny is the creator. We all have a source and destiny in common. We just have some different routes whereby we can get there. And service to self is one of the available paths. So for Ra gives a vibratory rate of 95%. If an entity has polarized negatively, 95%. Let me disclaim these numbers. It's numbers that, they bear metaphysical and philosophical implication, of course, but there's no measuring device for knowing what someone's vibratory rate is, service to others or service to self. And there's debate as to what exactly the numbers mean. But that said, if the negative entity has polarized their consciousness 95% service to self while in this third density plane of experience, then they may harvest, just as the positive entities may harvest, into the fourth density. Except come the fourth density is a bifurcated experience, whereas in third density we're sharing the same air together, positive and negative and unpolarized. In the fourth density, the planet itself is magnetized and charged to one polarity of the other. So the fourth density on Earth, according to Confederation sources, will be a positively oriented fourth density experience, and only those who have chosen the positive polarity will live in this environment and experience this Earth. The negative polarity, however, will occur on a different planet, and it will be a fourth density negative planet, and the planetary population will consist only of negatively oriented individuals interested in forming their empire and enslaving and manipulating others and closing their hearts quite intentionally. From there forward, the polarities continue in their respective environments, positive and negative. They move on to fifth density as positive and negative individuals and societies. And then comes sixth density, the density of unity, where the paradoxes are solved, love and light are balanced, etc. The positively polarized entities continue forward in their evolution without interruption or disruption, in my understanding. Ra calls the positively oriented path the path of that which is. So positively oriented entities are seeking to see the universe, to see self and other as it truly is. They're seeking to work with what is true, whereas the negative polarity is potentiating and maximizing the illusion of separation. The positive polarity is seeking unity. Negative polarity is intentionally seeking and using separation. And Ra calls that the path of that which is not. So when the path of that which is not enters into sixth density, it cannot continue beyond some point in the beginning stages. The sixth density light demands an embrace of the path of that which is. So the negative entities who've made it that far, all the way to early sixth density, must release their polarity altogether and enter into a reality of unity. That doesn't mean they switch from negative to positive polarity, because in sixth density, there is no longer any polarity, positive or negative, because it is the density of unity. But the sixth density entity has to give that up in order to experience that unity.
Beautifully laid out. Thank you. Um, oh, so many comments I can make on that. Like we can just extend ourselves there. um, yeah, the illusion of separation can only be maintained until certain points. That's beautiful. Austin, I want to give I want to get your answer on, because I feel like these, I know this can be taken into the metaphysics of how negative entities can continue to exist in time space, say, where there's no veil of forgetting, and how they can continue to be in the illusion of separation. But rather, I want to take this I want to take your opinion or your view on, because we're seeing what seems to be, and I think this is all a process that we're going through. But a lot of people see the situation right now on planet Earth like quite negative. And how do we use this to understand that the negative polarity is needed here on planet Earth? How do we use this negative environment that we're seeing to precisely do what we were talking about, the realization of self?
That's very, very good question. I think that, a lot of people would agree that the view on Earth right now, from a certain perspective, can seem very bleak. And Ra talked about this a little bit, even back during the Ra contact. I think, Don, the general question was like, how is it that Earth is going to be a positive planet when it seems so negative? And Ra's general answer to Don was that for the positive entity, the Earth seems incredibly negative just because we're sensitized to, suffering. And Ra called it a quiet horror. And I think the part of the way that I look at that is that when we talk about the negative polarity and service to self individuals, that is something very specific of individuals consciously attempting to harness the light of the creator for the self in a very intense way. I think a lot of what seems negative to us is the result not just of that, but also of a general confusion and fear, and people not having a clear grasp on themselves and on reality. And that results in sort of a very incoherent society that naturally then looks very negative to the positive individual. So I think one way to use that, to your question, for the positive entity is to, try to remove any distortions from your perception about what you think might be happening in terms of positive or negative, and attempt to view a situation simply from the perspective of what service can be offered at any moment, whether it is just opening your heart and accepting whoever is involved in that, whether it is actively offering your service to somebody, or using the negativity that you see as a reflection to learn more about yourself. Because part of the positive path, as Gary was talking about, is it's an acceptance of the universe as it is. And the negative polarity, or just general confusion, is an aspect of the creator. All entities are the creator. And the positive polarity is the polarity that attempts its best to see that and to recognize that truth. And so in an environment like we're in, where it's very confusing, there seems to be a lot of negativity, that is the prime environment for somebody to come into this world and challenge themselves to see the creator in any situation. One of the questions that Don asked Ra was, what are some exercises that can accelerate somebody towards the law of one? And Ra gave several, but their first one that they said was the most central and useful in our illusion is that the moment contains love, and the lesson is to constantly attempt to seek that love in every moment. And I think that is why this reality, the one that we live in right now, is both difficult and in a way a blessing, because it's a very difficult challenge to find love in every moment here. But since we have this crazy environment to evolve in, there's a lot of potential for accelerating our own inner awareness and accelerating our ability to share the love of the creator. Because if we can do it here, we can probably do it most places in the universe.
It seems that way. There, I tell my students sometimes that the more everything is quite balanced, so it depends on perception. If we see the amount of negativity that may be portrayed out there, means that there's an equal amount of positivity being formed, but as a potential that you need to see. And it seems like most of our consciousness is directed towards the negative side as a sort of distraction. But it seems to me that there's always a balance, and that that positivity lies in potential, and if you go seek it, you will find it. And that seems to be the case when we turn around from the negativity and just look at the positive side. And you said it beautifully when you said that there is that potential for people to be here and just expand their whatever perception they had, challenge themselves, like you said. So thank you for that. All right, we are in the hour, but I have to say I have at least one or two more questions that I want to ask, but I'm mindful of your time. How are you guys with time?
I'm cool.
Yeah, I can keep going.
Okay. So yeah, we're gonna extend this a couple of more minutes because I have good ones and I actually am really interested. There's some really deep metaphysical ones that I'm thrilled to ask. But there's one that is it's kind of I wouldn't say controversial, but it has thrown a lot of confusion in terms of sexual energy transfer. So I want to get into that, and I think C put it, just the letter C. I love that. She put it. I believe it's a she. I don't know why I got that. Maybe intuitively, but C says, in regards to sexual energy transfers, are homosexuals able to exchange sexual energy? More specifically, that of green, blue, indigo ray energy. In reading the Law of One material, it seemed as if sexual energy exchange was only of those mind-body-spirit complexes that were of opposite polarity, male-female, biologically, I suppose. She continues and says, I interpret the non-sexual emotion of love exchange, whether heterosexual or homosexual, can power those energy centers. But I would really like to be educated about the differences, if any, in regard to sexual energy exchange between homosexuals, heterosexual, mind-body-spirit complexes. So that was a mouthful, but I think the way I can summarize it is there is exchange of energy. And when Ra talked about sexual energy transfer and the need for the male and the female, does this have to be a biological male and female for sexual energy transfer? Or what's the difference between energy transfer of a sexual nature between male and female biological and homosexuals in this case? So that would go for you, Austin.
That's a very difficult question because it's just so wrapped up in a lot of cultural distortions that we have. And I believe C is referring to a part of the material where Ra talks about sexual energy transfer, and they discuss homosexual energy transfer, that it's a very debated passage. It's not very easily understood. And in my view, the way that I handle it is essentially how C describes the situation, that the component of sexual energy transfer seems primarily to me to be, for a positive social sexual energy transfer, love. And regardless of anything that Ra says or how anybody might interpret what Ra says, I think the way that we can know that positive sexual energy transfer can happen between, same-sex individuals or homosexual individuals, is just ask them if it happens for them. And, if you would absolutely get a positive response that yes, it happens. You can describe what it means to have a green ray energy transfer, blue ray energy transfer. And, individuals who have experienced that in, homosexual energy exchange can attest to that it is possible. So that's the only evidence I need to know that it's possible, is just that kind of testimony. To talk about the metaphysical aspect of this sort of male-female dynamic, I think that, using the terms male and female and applying them biologically, there's obviously something there in terms of a polarity. And when you have an exchange, you have to have a polarity, a difference between two individuals that exchange can happen across. There has to be something that one is offering and the other is receiving, and vice versa. And so the way that I see it in terms of sexual energy transfer is that so long as there is some kind of polarized nature to their sexualities, and classically, in a very traditional sense, we would describe that as a male and female energy. Those definitions are kind of becoming reworked and kind of dissolving a bit, and we're discovering new types of ways to describe different types of dynamics and different types of polarities. And so I think describing it as male and female, or divine masculine, divine feminine, stuff like that, there is something there to work with. But then there are also new ways to describe different types of sexual polarities, that you can have an exchange across those polarities, and two individuals can empower each other through sexual energy transfer, that don't necessarily have to describe their energies as male or female, but so long as there's some kind of dynamic tension in their sexual natures, I think it's possible for there to be a positive energy transfer.
I love that answer. Thank you. Because there is, like you described, there is the metaphysical, which is really what Ra describes in a sense. I think part of the confusion, and Gary, I would love for you to expand on this, is that there is, as Ra said, the exchange between male and female for the red ray. And they were talking about, I know Don asked questions about he was interested in knowing what makes the possibility of somebody, conceiving a child. And Ross said it was, it's completely random. So they were talking about, in that respect, to the sexual energy transfer in regards to conceiving a child, where, you obviously need a biological male and female, but they also went to say the exchange that happens between the differential that exists between positive and negative, and this just being a term for polarity, but the male and female, and that one exchanges the other, what has in excess. So does that make sense as to why maybe the confusion might be? I don't know what your thoughts are on it, Gary.
You're asking regarding the source of the confusion on this particular point?
Not so much the source, but rather, because there's the point where we had the biological male and female, added into the equation when, there is the conceiving of a child, and there needs to be some sort of sexual energy transfer for this to occur randomly. And then there is, the excess of male and female exchange, which is, to my understanding, the metaphysical exchange.
Yes. C's question I want to highlight was rooted in a few Q&As that Austin referenced, whereby Ra talks about a difficulty in some part of the non-hetero relationship, and it has lent itself to all sorts of interpretations and misinterpretations. And so I want to highlight that. And in terms of the energy exchange, yes, your understanding corresponds with my own. Obviously, the reproductive cycle of humanity relies on the sperm and the egg provided by the biological male and biological female, respectively. However, energy exchange is not necessarily, I think this is where you were going, one and the same with the biological sex. It's rather a ratio of the male slash the masculine slash feminine principle within us. And it's polarized, I don't know if I want to say opposite or inverse with our partner or partners. Ra, in the metaphysics of the law of one, we as individuals are the creator. Ra describes that we contain all that there is. The entire infinite universe exists within each of us. And they say that we are not, in our present incarnate state, we're not simply male and we're not simply female. We're both male and female. We're just one of those two predominates in our experience in the incarnate state. Like we three right now are incarnated as males, and our masculine slash feminine ratio is probably more weighted towards the masculine. However, in previous incarnations, we three have presumably incarnated as females, as women, who carried a greater weight towards the feminine slash masculine ratio. However, if so, yeah, it's that ratio which is key. Whatever your biological sex, whatever your gender identity, whatever your attraction to other people, it's the operation of those two polarities, as Austin was referencing, that create the difference whereby energy can be exchanged, with one entity having something to give, the other having something to receive, and vice versa. It's my rough understanding of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we can go on with this for a while, I'm sure. So I'm just going to go to the next question, because yeah, this is it's interesting just to some of the points you guys brought up, which is the predominance that exist in the individual, and mostly what you just said, Gary, that we contain, like, we are the creator, we contain the whole universe within us. So it would seem sort of limited to a point that sexual energy transfer it's limited just by the biological sex. And to me, I mean, the way I saw it was that there was that need, of course, as Don was asking, because Don was, for a couple of questions, he was asking a lot about how does the child, gets conceived. And Ra mentioned a couple of times that it was just, a random effect, that I think it is the exchange, the red ray exchange is random. Like there's no reason why, it would work or not work in terms of, conceiving a child. But yeah, we can probably do an hour on this. All right, let me see. Let's talk about something that I'm interested as well. And it has to do with, I'm going to cover actually a couple of questions in just one question regarding the densities and entities from 7th to 8th density. So we're entering that sort of territory. I'm going to read those two questions, and they're going to merge into just one answer, because they're all pretty much related. So Melkorfin, I actually love that name for being a Lord of the Rings nerd. So I'm interested in the densities and the relationship with the octave. When your perception moves from 7 to 8 density, does your perception move to another galaxy? In our now universe, I guess it's in our universe, or does your perception move to another whole octave that is a new, acknowledgeable, unknowable universe with its own densities? And also Octavio Rodriguez says, Ra mentions that they have teachers in 7 density. Does this mean that in 7 density, there is still a certain individuation? Are these entities already in the next octave? So in essence, I know the questions, and there's even one more that has to do with the various densities of consciousness, and how you feel or how your perception changes in different densities of consciousness. But the entities themselves that seem to reside in 7 density, and I'll finish up with another question for Austin. So first, just your general impressions as to how this, how you see this, Gary, the entities that are moving from 7 to 8 density. How does this process perceptually happens?
Woo!
Yeah.
How do I not answer this one? I don't mean avoid it, like, because it's literally impossible for me to answer. So it's just like, how do I go about not answering it? Ra says of 6 density, just looked up the quote, to speak of that which 6 density social memory complexes labor within. So basically, to speak about the operation of 6 density, is at best misprision of plain communication, for much is lost in transmission of concept from density to density, and the discussion of 6th density is inevitably distorted. And that's for 6th density. We're talking about 7th. Ra describes that in the 7th density, they say it's the density where in each density we have one basic big chief lesson. Like here we're choosing polarity, service to others or service to self. 4th density, we're learning the lessons of love and understanding. 5th, the lessons of wisdom. 6th, the lessons of unity, balancing love and wisdom and becoming unified. 7th, they describe, we learn the law of foreverness. And what exactly that means, I don't know. I don't know that there's even any description given about 7th density besides the formation of the mind, body, spirit complex totality, which somehow, before moving forward across the threshold, gifts itself the higher self, like creates the higher self for the incarnate entity. It's way outside of my pay grade. But whatever does happen in 7th density, it does appear to be the final big stage of this particular octave. I would imagine that there's very little vestige of individuality remaining. What that looks like, how that manifests, I don't know. Ra describes their own 6th density experience as being of one mind among their whole planetary group. I mean, if you can imagine what were once tens of millions of individuals all thinking and operating as one, to the point that whether you are speaking to one seeming unit within the whole or whether you're speaking to the whole makes no difference. They've unified to that extent. But there's still some semblance of individuality from what I gather. So the path towards the creator is the path of increasing unity. So I would imagine that in the 7th density, that unity is all the more all the deeper. I'm saying that wrongly. The individual or the individual of the group is merging more and more with other selves, whether the social memory complexes come together, whether they start merging into the logos itself, whether they become logoi, I don't know. But there is some physical corollary, I think, that might lend a little bit of insight when we look at black holes. The physics of the black hole describe a very bizarre situation, bizarre by our little monkey brains. whereby, you know, a star has exploded, though I don't know how relevant it is to this discussion, but it collapses in on itself and creates a gravity so intense that light itself, as we all know, cannot escape the black hole. It pulls everything into itself, and thus making it impossible for our present science to even look into a black hole, because it's, you know, we see a nothingness. There's nothing, no electromagnetic spectrum to reflect back to us. Ra points to the black hole as a sort of physical manifestation of what is ultimately a spiritual or metaphysical process. I won't drag this on much longer. The black hole, sort of in a physical outward way, represents the coalescing and of the octave itself, of the completion of that evolution of consciousness. So the start of the octave is the outbeating heart of creation, from intelligent infinity that has no space and time, no subject and object, no boundaries, no finity, no qualities that we can use to describe it, bursts the manifest creation, or the octave, or the universe, through the primal distortions of the free will. So this is like the you know, what in simpler scientific terms might be seen as the Big Bang. You know, from this singularity, from this seeming nothingness almost, exploded the universe, and creation began to unfold, and consciousness began to evolve through this curriculum. Well, at the other end of the Big Bang is the black hole, whereby that all that creation and everything that was experienced, and every memory and every lived moment and every interaction and every understanding is harvested, so to speak. The creator, Ra uses a fascinating phrase. They say systematic reabsorption. So the creator systematically reabsorbs all that experience, all the identities, everything that happened, back into itself, as in a physical corollary, I believe the black hole does. And this is sort of our gift to the creator. We, entities of consciousness who undertook this curriculum and picked up experience along the road, then return this back to the creator at that event horizon, whereby we are reabsorbed and there is no longer difference. We become completely one again. We return to the infinity that we always have been, underneath the seeming illusion of separation and space and time. We release all illusion, all fictions, and we become that which we always have been, infinity. And Ra from there describes a timeless state, a sort of in-between node between the octaves, whereby all that experience is sort of assimilated, processed, analyzed, understood. The numbers are crunched. And from that, some kind of learning happens. And a new octave is born, a new Big Bang, a new universe. And there's some kind of progression that happens from octave to octave. Ra describes how the polarities of the mover and the moved, and male and female, were discovered, so to speak, in the previous octave, and were harvested from that octave to make part of this experience. And now in this octave, we're learning new things, and we're building upon that previous learning. And whatever it is that the creator can glean from this octave will be harvested, distilled, and taken into the next octave. I actually did have a few words to offer there, but yeah, sorry, I don't know if I spoke to your question at all.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the trip, Gary, because that's exactly what I think at least I wanted to hear, like this whole progression of how through, I mean, you just took me for the whole trip that I wanted to hear, because this, I mean, I love to use analogies, and this is the cosmic mind at work and we're experiencing it. Now, in the process of, like you said, it was quite relevant when you use the point of the black hole, as Ross says, because that's, the way spiritual mass is accrued. So it kind of, that's the purpose of all of this, and it describes it perfectly. So when we get closer to seven density, it seems like we just get, not we as if we were something separate, but the perception, which is all we really are, gets reabsorbed into the oneness and the all being. So I'm gonna raise this even a little bit more for Austin. So I hope you're ready, Austin. I've been cracking my knuckles here. Because there's one passage or a couple of passages from Ra in the material where they talk about entities from the new octave shining their light and contributing not only to the whole creation, but also in times of harvest. Like, they are part of our guardians, and this new octave entities now are beyond the octave. So Austin, again, sorry if it's completely out of this universe, literally, but I don't know if you would like to expand on that. And you can throw it to Gary as well. I don't know. This is my last attempt to get into the depths of the universe.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's mind-bending stuff to try to consider what any of this means. And the unfortunate thing is Ra gave us just a few words about these kinds of things, and Gary and I can't really expand any more on what Ra said. But what you're talking about is, at one point Ra mentioned they called them guardians, and even that's confusing because they also called other types of entities guardians too. But they called them guardians from the next octave, and basically said that they helped out during the process of harvest in offering the precise amount of the light love of the creator as necessary for the individual, something along those lines. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? That would actually, I've never thought we should ask Kuo, like, what does that mean? What is this process? It's the way that I typically try to wrap my head around this is to first acknowledge that, like Ra said, all begins and ends in mystery. And even Ra probably doesn't know exactly what that means. They have an understanding of the process, but even they were kind of reticent to talk about the specifics of things that were beyond their own understanding. There were things Ra didn't know. So what does it mean for these guardians to come from the next octave? When I think about a dynamic like that, I just have to release any conception I have of what it means to even be an entity, to be an intelligent being of the creator. And our own conception of that is wrapped up in the illusion. We have this illusory idea of what it means to be a self, what it means to have intelligence, what it means to act and to offer things. And once an entity has graduated through seventh density to the next octave, to eighth density, and for some reason, somehow then interacts with the previous octave, it's beyond any of those concepts. Whatever we imagine to be a self offering something to another self, I think that we just have to forget any conscious conceptualization of what that means. And sometimes I kind of think about it as more of they're not personalities. They're not necessarily individuals. They might, what we consider to be and a guardian might be more of a field of intelligence, an aspect of intelligence of the creator. And they might have some way that they can be described as entities in a certain sense, but our relationship to the idea of an entity might be completely meaningless in that terms. It's only just a way for us as very limited beings to grasp something that is so far beyond us that we can't even conceive of what it is. It's sort of like how Carl Sagan described the Flatlanders, the 2D beings. When they see a three-dimensional being, all they see is a line, basically. But then take that to a two-dimensional being seeing a 20-dimensional being. They still just see a line, but the complexity is so far beyond what a two-dimensional being could even grasp. I think that's what we're thinking about when we talk about these guardians.
I should have known that you studied Carl Sagan. Me being an atheist, or previously an atheist. Carl Sagan was awesome. Still is. Yeah, I want to share this one bit, and we'll conclude this. But this really makes me just think about without getting into the details of the law of one and the raw material and what it means and the entities and everything, just go back to our minds and know that this new octave is already present in our consciousness. We may not be able to discern it as obviously higher density entities, but it seems to me that we have that. And the way I can create an analogy for this, and this is the way I kind of wrapped my head around it, was that the creator is already living everything. It's almost like we are a living being that has all experiences wrapped in our minds. Like our mind contains all of our experiences as an individual self. But this new entity seemed to me, or the new octave entities, is just the newest or most updated expression of the actual creator. Since we are thoughts in its mind, it seems to me like these new entities are not the conclusion, but the most current, I don't know if that makes sense, but the current amalgamation of everything that exists right now in the universe. It's almost like the one consciousness gathering all this experience uses all of this experience to also shine light and information to us who are still in its own mind. So yeah, I know it gets very bizarre at this point, but this is just the things that I'm sure you guys do too. It goes and just it's food for thought for sure. Guys, I'm really mindful of your time, so we're gonna leave it here. I'm gonna ask you one more question that you can wrap it up with. What I want to know about you guys. What's LNL Research been up to? Talk to me about the website and everything else. What are the projects you have? Anything that you want to share, with the people that are studying the law of one. And I will leave that to you. But the last question I had from somebody, and I thought it was a beautiful way to end it, is I'll read it straight because it's pretty. How can we apply the law of one in our day-to-day practice? And you can finish it up, Austin, with what you have for NLL Research, and that'll be it.
All right. I definitely want to split that one with Gary. What LL Research is doing right now, a lot. We always have a lot going on. If you're interested in learning about, what we have to offer, our website, llresearch.org. And if you're curious about sort of the day-to-day operations, just wondering what Gary and I do on a day-to-day basis from the offices of our homes for LL Research, you can look at our Blogworthy report. If you go to the About section, there's 2 journals, and the Blogworthy kind of details almost every little thing that we do for LL Research. A big ongoing project that about, Gabriel, is that we have many volunteer translators that we cherish deeply and who offer their service freely and with a lot of passion, and we appreciate it so much to translate the material. Most of what we have has been translated in some of, how many languages are we at, Gary? 14?
21.
21.
Wow.
My numbers from like a decade ago.
Yeah. Where have you been?
Wow. 21 languages have some form of translation available to them. So that's a big one. Currently, we are actually hiring for a new position because there's a lot of projects going on. So we're hiring for a part-time position. You can view details about that if you see this around the time of recording on the front page of LL Research. And I guess just to reference one other big project going on is Jim recently authored a sequel to Carla's Living the Law of 101.
Oh, wow.
And we are going through the process of editing that to get that published, which will be out at some point this year. Not sure how long that might take. So that's just a very, very small snapshot of what we've got going on. And the question, can you say the question again?
Sure. How can we apply the law of one in our day-to-day
How
practice?
can we apply the law of one in our day-to-day practice? For me, that means, primarily what I referenced earlier, the moment contains love, and the constant attempt to seek that love in the moment is, I think, the primary aspect of applying the law of one to me. And a big part of that quote to me is it's the attempt to seek it, because it's going to be impossible for us to find love in every single moment. I think if we were able to do that, we wouldn't be here in third density. And so as long as we attempt, we are constantly making the attempt to find love within our hearts in any situation that we're experiencing. And sometimes we fail, sometimes we succeed. And when we fail, we try to figure out why, try to figure out what barriers were there blocking us from finding that love in the moment. And how do we then dissolve those barriers? How do we remove those barriers between our current experience, what we did experience, and the love in our hearts? And to me, that is just the primary teaching of the law of one. And law of one offers so many tools to go about that, but that is the heart of it for me, and how to live the law of one.
Thank you, Austin. Gary, I want to add to your conclusion a concept guide, which was a book that I found that you wrote with, I believe, Trisha, and it was, still is, super helpful. And I don't know where I read from you that there will be a second part, so if you can add that in, somewhere in your projects, and let us know what's going on. I personally would be fully appreciating of that.
Thanks for that reflection. And thank you for the whiteboard note behind you too. I've been enjoying that throughout the interview. So yeah, I guess I'll start with a concept guide. And that was supported and to a degree co-written, not by Trisha, but by a friend named Diana Roy. Super consciousness person. And so the concept guide. Yes, I have it in my heart to write a book called The Mystical Heart of the Law of One. I've already got the core of it written. I wrote it a few years ago, but I want to read more from the mystics again and revisit my classics and develop the piece further. But what I want the mission of the book. Hey, Ems. Thanks. The mission of the book will be to focus in on what I believe is the heart and essence of the non-dual core of Ra's law of one. And a concept guide itself is, I learned so much through putting that book together. It revealed to me that much of the philosophy doesn't come into full view unless you read every iteration of a particular concept. For instance, if you run a search on logos, and then read the piece that existed about the logos in session 3 and then the next piece in session 7, a much fuller picture begins to emerge. And so I want to create more concepts using that method. And about that method, I will segue into now what is up at LL Research. We have on the drawing board right now, just in its infancy, what will become a massive, massive project to tag the entire transcript library. If the viewers of your program are unfamiliar, LL Research hosts or publishes all of the conscious channeling with Confederation sources, beginning in 1974, all the way up to the present on its website. The material that we are talking about on this program is the raw contact, or the law of one material. This was a very special subset of channeling in LL Research's history. It was 106 sessions that took place from 1981 to 1983. By far, the great majority of LL's work has been conscious channeling of Confederation sources like Quo, Hatam, Latwii, and so forth. And there's a massive text library of all this material. But we don't have an index for it. It's hard to know exactly what's in it. What questions have been asked before? What has the Confederation said about this concept in 1981 and then in 1992 and so forth? So we're going to launch a many volunteer project to read through that and create some kind of super index of A to Z, every term that's located in those transcripts, some kind of database of all the questions, so that we open it up for research and reveal the gems that are just kind of hidden by the quantity of text. So that's a big project for us. And the other one that I would end with is the continuation of the development of our channeling circle. Austin, myself, Trish and Kathy are the 4 local entities who meet with Jim twice a month to learn and continue practicing the art of channeling. We've been doing that for several years. Transcripts are published on the site. And just very recently, as of a week and a half ago, Austin, Trish, and I met to host an additional circle on our own, kind of spread our wings a bit and see what we can do with channeling. So that is ongoing. And then to the question about living the law of one, I appreciate Austin's orientation in terms of describing, how he attempts it. And I would say that my own path, really anybody who seeks the law of one can be understood through the container of what Ra calls the disciplines of the personality. They say that those disciplines are to know yourself, accept yourself, and become the creator. So those 3 components are more or less present in everybody's processes. And on the know yourself part, for me, that the cornerstone is meditation. I know it's true for Austin as well. It is the most recommended tool or method or activity by the Confederation sources for seeking the creator. Meditation and conscious entering into silence in some fashion is critical for the knowing of the self and the discovering of the self as the creator. So meditation, daily meditation for me, attempting to engage in various modes of self-inquiry, asking myself what my motivations are for particular actions, trying to understand why I have this particular neuroses, or why I'm an idiot in this way, or why I'm upset or angry or so forth. And using the mirrors that others provide us too, particularly, I have a really good mirror in my wife, very supportive, loving mirror, but gives me a good mechanism of feedback for my own limitations and shortcomings and so forth. So leaning into that as well. And the acceptance part of know yourself, accept yourself, become the creator. It's tough work for all of us, but learning to release self-judgment, learning to release judgment of others, learning to accept me as I am in my full light and dark, in my brilliance and my idiocy. And the same with others, learning to love and accept others and forgive wrongdoings and so forth. And then the become the creator is the mystical part, the part that's wrapped in mystery. That's the transformation of the individual into the one. The dismantlement of the veil, the release of the illusion of individuality. So if there is one recommendation I could give to anybody who for some reason wants to hear my opinion on the question, meditation. It's key, daily if possible, however many minutes.
Love it. Thank you for the answers. Thank you for your patience during the last almost 2 hours. We extended ourselves. I mean, I could go on for a while, but I really appreciate you guys, not only, you know, this time, but also what you continue to do, because I believe that LNL research is such a robust place to maintain something that is so appealing, you know, for a community that normally starts very confused, and we want answers and we want consistency, which seems to be, you know, an issue sometimes when we get into this. And LNL research, you know, beyond the entities that work there, is just, you know, one thing that maintains things. It seems to have a life of its own, and I'm sure you guys would attest to that. And you guys maintaining it is, it's really powerful. I was super excited when I saw the new website, and I knew that new things come along with that. So, like you two guys mentioned, all those links are going to be in the description, of course, for anybody listening to go check it out. So again, I cannot express my gratitude. I feel humbled by your wisdom, your love, and your passion for this, because I share it, and I'm just super grateful to be, you know, alive and around, you know, people like you, that we can spend some time like this. And, you know, I don't think we got to half of the questions I had, but still, you know, this was awesome. Thank you guys again, and we'll be seeing each other.
Thank you so much. It was great being here. It's really enjoyable, and an honor to be invited to join you.
Thank you, Austin.
Likewise, this has been absolutely fantastic, Gabriel, and we're birds of a feather with our love of the law of one. That we can have this dialogue at all bespeaks of our shared spiritual awareness, maybe even our shared spiritual origins, and our passion in common. And your passion and your acumen for the path and the material is very clear. So thank you for sharing your light with us and for inviting us on.
That's what we're here for. All right, guys. Thank you.